So welcome officially everyone to Online Young Researcher Workshop of 2020. So this is the fourth Young Researcher Workshop organized by SIU Global and SIANI. Everyone's hear me okay? Yes, perfect. So this year we have moved the workshop to an online platform due to the pandemic. I hope that everyone is doing well and stay healthy and through this difficult time. We are glad, however, that we can turn this lemon to the lemonade because we expand the participants list and geography to 17 different countries. So this year we have young researchers zooming in from all around the world, and those who've been working all the regions in the world actually. So we organize the workshop every 2 years, aiming to support young researchers to develop their skill and building up their network to work across different disciplines in order to address the core issue of sustainability. So this year, we choose to address the issue of food systems. And since the hunger and malnutrition are on the growing challenge in the overpopulated world, introduce and welcome Aniek Hebnick, who's gonna inspire us with her experience working with the sustainable food system change, and she will be joining in from Rotterdam, the Netherlands.
All right, I hope you can all hear me and that you can see my screen. I'm just reorganizing what I see on my screen. So, yeah, good morning. And first of all, many thanks to both SIANI and SLU for inviting me to speak. And of course, I'll be doing this digitally from Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And it would have been much nicer to meet in person, but at the same time, I do second what has already been said. At least now we have a very different crowd, which is very nice. So I hope that the people who join us during strange hours because of the time zone difference, that you made yourself a very nice cup of coffee. So my name is Aniek Hebinck, and I'm a postdoc at the Research Institute Drift. And today I will present some of my thinking and work around transformative dynamics towards sustainable food systems. So a little context and background about me. I have completed my PhD at the Stockholm Rosén Center in Sweden a few years ago. And I wrote my PhD on the role of civil action in addressing global food system challenges. And while writing my PhD, I also worked as a researcher at the Environmental Change Institute in Oxford. And there I contributed to various international food system change projects. After my PhD, I joined SIANI and the SLU team for a short while, supporting communication efforts. So you can see why I'm rather sad to not be there in person and to visit my old workplace. But then I had the opportunity to start as a postdoc at the Research Institute Drift for Transitions. And that's where I'm now working in research and also in kind of social consultancy on food transitions. But primarily, I now work on the SIRIUS project, which explores urban food systems and the role of innovation in particular. And what I think is very nice about the institute where I work now is that we have activities around a broad range of topics, but what they all have in common is that they try to further sustainability transitions. And our activities really span from research, university and business education, consultancy and activism. But my research in particular is very much focused on food. So it's really characterized by quite a palette of different research topics. And this is mostly influenced by all the different institutes that I've been part of. But all are still connected to food. Today I will focus on kind of sharing my use of a food systems approach. So I'm happy that I had an introduction from Madeleine emphasizing, and both Sarah as well, emphasizing the need to look through a food systems lens. So why I find this useful for exploring processes of change and forward-looking exercises. And lastly, how this can help reflect on what we call directionalities in change. So to start at the beginning, why a food systems approach? Well, firstly, because it's useful in making complexity visible. And secondly, because it can help bridge different disciplines, paradigms, and sectors, and to sort of, unlike these cats, to think out of the box. And this is particularly useful for interdisciplinary science, as the food systems framework can function as a common ground, so to say, something that everybody in some way can connect to. But it's also conducive to exploring trade-offs and synergies, and especially in combination with foresight, so futuring. It can also be used for the exploration of various scenarios and their embedded directionality, but also the power dynamics that you see within the system. So yeah, what do we talk about when we say food systems, and how can we use this to analyze food systems? Well, here is just one example of a food system perspective. As Madeleine already emphasized, there are many different ways of understanding a food system, and that is quite crucial to how, yeah, for the implications that you see coming out of it, but also the solutions that you see within the system. And there are many ways of portraying complex dynamic systems. So this is just one, but what I quite like about this one is that it does show, you know, political, economic, physical, social, and so on, and also kind of the supply chain ranging in or kind of the spatial breadth of the supply chain. But to put in words, I always say that food systems are made up of networks of actors performing food-related activities, and this system is then again influenced by social and environmental drivers. And ideally, these food-related activities then result in sustainable food and nutrition security, as this is then the outcome of the system. But to present a bit of a simpler picture that shows basically the bare essentials, food systems, the section highlighted in right, exists, like I just said, with a certain function or outcomes in mind. So here in this figure that I've drawn for my PhD thesis is that the outcome of the system is supposed to be kind of social equity, healthy diets, sustainable environmental impacts, and the balanced economy. But then the functioning of the system is kind of made visible in the feedbacks that the system provides. So social and environmental feedbacks as well. For example, a change in the level of GHG emissions or an increase in livelihoods. However, the functioning of the system and its ability to kind of deliver outcomes that we wanted to deliver are also impacted upon by other drivers, such as changes in demographics, kind of economic happenings, climate change, etc. But in a perfect system, all these different elements would be in balance and they would deliver the outcomes that we want from it. However, the big problem here is that this system that we're looking at the moment is not balanced. So, you know, the system is malfunctioning, and the results and causes of it is a topic of research for many of us, because we see that food systems today don't provide these outcomes that we want. They are neither sustainable nor secure for all. In fact, their configuration and inherent trade-offs undermine the development of many of the SDGs. But unfortunately, this current configuration is also highly resilient. So it's kind of riddled with lock-ins, such as knowledge constraints, but also regulatory or social, cultural, and biophysical constraints. And these really make it very difficult to progress. And as many have already argued before, these systems are in need of rewiring. So there is a clear need for transformative change and really to transition to a new, to different systems. So when I talk about transformative change, what I mean is fundamental changes in structure, functions of systems, and relations among elements within the system. And in many cases, this means a system that kind of counters the dominant ways of doing. In other words, a system that is based on alternative ways of doing. And while the word transformative change often makes us think of equitable sustainability, they're kind of one and the same when people speak about it. In reality, processes of change inevitably involve both winners and losers, because it's out with the old and in with the new. So this process is highly political, and it requires broader reflection on who stands to win and whether it's an equitable process, who stands to lose, and if it's unavoidable that there will be losers in the process, how can we seek to better support them? So because of this, we argue that it's crucial to reflect on the directionality of change. So when we talk about change, to ask yourself, change to what kind of sustainability for whom, and who gets to decide about this sustainability. So what this basically tells us is that food system directionality matters. It matters what you consider to be part of the system within its boundaries, so to say, because this influences what drivers you see as key to influencing your system. And this kind of view of the drivers that you see then influences what options you see to address the problems or solutions, if you will. And this very fact gives rise to various different interpretations when it comes to pathways to sustainability. So pathways really can range from featuring tech fixes to very comprehensive integrated approaches, and basically from focusing on furthering system efficiency to system transformation. So with this in mind, one can start looking at the implications of these different pathways. And at this first point, the majority will seem to point towards roughly the same kind of sustainability, as all usually emphasize environmental sustainability and social equity as key to their focus. So here, forward-looking exercises are useful to assess who might be the winners and losers, what might be unintended consequences moving towards the future, and what might entail a combination of multiple pathways, because there are always kind of different approaches being put into play at the same time. We're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. So looking at all of these elements through an anticipatory lens helps to uncover trade-offs, gaps in approaches, but possibly it can also highlight synergies between approaches. And this is essentially what we did in a very recent report for the Cgir, and I did this in collaboration with my colleagues Monica Zurich from the Environmental Change Institute and with Oderilwe Selomani from the Center for Complex Systems in Transition in Stellenbosch. And this report will be made public very soon because it will be sent to all of the donors and partners of the Cg, so that's quite exciting. But our main task for the Cg was to create a synthesis of existing forward-looking agriculture and food system reports. And here we were specifically asked to do this through the lens of challenges for climate and environmental impacts in relation to food security. And while we put the broader focus on these two elements, climate change and the environment, we argued that it didn't make sense to look at them in isolation, because food systems are complex and dynamic, and talking about change in one area cannot be seen separately from dynamics in another area. So instead, we were a bit stubborn, and we just took a food systems approach. So we reviewed various influential studies. Some of these reports you might have seen or read. But yeah, all these reports had different kind of issues that they focused on. For example, one focused really on the protein transition, others focused on supply chain efficiency. They had different interpretations of food systems. You can see that there's three that had that we considered to have a full food systems approach. All reports were written up by a range of different actors. So we're talking here about the World Resources Institute up to kind of the World Economic Forum, along with the McKinsey Global Knowledge Initiative. So it's both public, private, and kind of consortia of academics. And lastly, all these forward-looking reports use different foresight methods, ranging from horizon scanning to in-depth scenario analysis. So it was up to us to try and compare these and to make sense of them for the Cgir. So what we did is we kind of designed a 4-step analysis to really compare these food system pathways across diverse directionalities. And we first started by uncovering what the approaches saw as the key drivers of change for food systems towards the future. So what do they think will have the biggest impact on shaping food systems? Second, we connected this to the proposed options for change highlighted in these approaches, as this was kind of our first step to uncover these different directionalities as sort of kind of flavors of change. Third, we then assessed how they see these proposed options for change kind of resulting in future change. So to compare this, we looked at all references that they made about the future, both qualitative and quantitative. And lastly, we then looked across these different points to assess crucial trade-offs that already exist, but also what issues might be embedded in these. So in this first step, focusing on the drivers, yeah, it was already quite an interesting picture, and this highlighted drivers of change, not only to do with climate change and environmental issues, as was already kind of our idea, but also around societal dynamics, market and governance dynamics, and technological development. And some of these will highlight topics of your research, I'm sure. So these were highlighted as important drivers of change across all of these reports, which to us highlighted really that there are many moving parts towards future change, making a food system perspective both useful but also vital. So the next step was then to connect the perspective on these drivers to kind of proposed solutions for change. And this resulted in tables such as these, one for each of the driver categories. So one for social dynamics, technological developments, policy dynamics, environmental impacts, and one for market dynamics. And what these tables kind of attempt to show is what was mentioned in the reports as essential to address, followed by various options that were mentioned to address these issues. So for example, in this table, you see that many reports highlight the current increase in GHG emission as a crucial driver for food system change. And then on the right hand, you see that of the pathways for change, a bunch were mentioned, such as, for example, the restoration of peatlands, but also fossil fuel-free innovations. And these different pathways of change are also nicely visible in the table that shows technological development, because here you see both pathways aimed at adapting the current system, such as pathways for precision agriculture, but also more aimed at transformation of the system, such as research and development for regenerative agriculture, which would really be a step towards a different system. But when we're looking at all these different tables, you get some sense of the different scope for action that different communities see. And here we roughly see two types of different mechanisms of change. So transformative change, change that is geared towards a new system, and incremental change, which kind of sees room for improvement within the same system. And while the first aims to find a system that is kind of inherently sustainable, the second aims to find kind of the margins of sustainability within the current. The third step that we took was then to start looking towards future implications of these pathways. And here it's good to know that when we talk about foresight, we generally talk about scenarios, and these are used to explore plausible futures around the interaction of drivers. And foresight efforts can contain both qualitative and quantitative modeling approaches. But generally, these are based on historical trends combined with kind of emerging knowledge around the new drivers and interactions between drivers, and a particular system understanding that somebody has. So for this third step, we look towards these future implications, and that led us to yet another very big table. And this table attempts to really show our kind of understanding of the breakdown of the 3 full system food system reports and how they would score when it comes to delivering key food system outcomes. And these are indications of how future status would compare to the status today. And here you see, for example, that both FOLU, EAT, and WRI each have a business as usual scenario or a baseline scenario. So what would happen in the future if we wouldn't do anything, basically. But then all of them also have pathway of change scenarios. So kind of the pathways that they envision as propelling us towards a sustainable future. And here you will see that WRI has actually 3 pathways, and that is because they have looked at varying levels of global coordination and ambition, because they kind of realize that their wish list is probably very difficult to achieve. And obviously it's a bit much to go into this table really in detail, as that would really require diving into the different assumptions that are made across these different reports and how they explore food systems. But for example, what we can look at is how different outcomes are connected throughout the scenarios. For example, WRI here sees an increase in biodiversity in their pathway of change scenario, but this is then tied to a decrease in agricultural land use and a decrease in land fragmentation. So then a decrease in agricultural land, they argue, will free up space for natural landscape restoration. But what you also see is that this decrease in land management is only possible when food demand for the global population is still met. So they do this, so to do this, there either needs to be an increase in crop yield or a decrease in food loss and waste. But both would allow for less agricultural land use while still producing the amount of food that is needed for the global population. So this already highlights a crucial trade-off and future challenge that absolutely needs addressing towards the future. And it also shows that a lot of these exercises are not capable of making meaningful assessments of all food system outcomes, because we also see a lot of gaps, and that they mostly can focus on biophysical change processes. Oh. So some of the key challenges that then come to the fore from these reports, which I'm sure relate to the research of what many of you are doing. The first point being that adaptation measures remain absolutely essential to meet GHG levels. In fact, the ability to meet the desired levels within adaptation alone, or with adaptation alone, they argue is rather unlikely, and that it will require a lot more efforts to be put towards mitigation of GHG emissions. Second, as highlighted in the table as well, there is this key trade-off between food demand, GHG mitigation, and land use management. And according to these reports, this requires both global level coordination, because we need to kind of distribute food in a more efficient way in order to be able to reduce our kind of pressure on land use. But then, for example, WRI also argues that this will really require breakthrough technologies when it comes to both crop yield and food waste and loss kind of prevention. But inevitably, this will kind of involve the making of difficult decisions, because these are trade-offs, and win-win situations are here almost deemed impossible. So the third kind of key point that we see coming out of these reports is that many still see technology as a crucial driver for change. And this really ranges from kind of tech dreams with drones and everything to kind of social innovation oriented technologies that, for example, strengthen social networks. So these reports that I just showed in the big table are relatively comparable in terms of system focus, meaning that we can really put them side by side and see how their proposed solutions might impact food systems. But for others, this is not so straightforward. Others take a more narrow focus, leaving gaps when it comes to food system outcomes. And most of these gaps are around equity considerations. And such gaps also make it very easy for them to claim that their proposed pathway of change impacts on equity. But also a more narrow focus makes it difficult to see the proper future implications and unintended consequences, as in complex dynamic systems, such as food systems, change in one area cannot be seen separately from dynamics in another. So reflection on these issues is crucial, as these reports are generally quite influential on the political stage, making it essential to be clear about one's system understanding and idea of directionality to sustainability. And this really to avoid thinking in singular race tracks to sustainability. So to cover some of these gaps across these reports and to make sure we start seeing food systems as complex and adaptive, we have outlined some points for future research. And for starters, there was no thorough assessment of disruptive technologies. So the reports that offered the most disruptive technologies didn't take a full system perspective. Again, leaving quite open who this might benefit and who might lose from it. So again, no talk about equity considerations, but also leaving it completely open what kind of unintended consequences of these often technological innovations are. Second, none of the reports really reimagine policy, governance, or economic systems, and instead, mechanisms of change only focus on technological innovation and the steering of social dynamics, such as dietary change. Which I think is a big miss from all of these reports, to assume that both governance and economic systems will function in a way that will allow us to meet our food security goals. Lastly, considering the emphasis on dietary change as a key mechanism of change across kind of the planet, surprisingly little effort has been put into thinking through what dietary change might mean in the global south and how this could be implemented in an equitable manner. So basically all reports flow over of the words equity and equality, but none actually really explore or propose ways to make the system more equitable. And instead they kind of suggest that their pathway will, so to say, have equity as a trickle-down effect, which of course is extremely problematic given their political kind of platform that they have. So that already brings me to the end of my presentation, because the minutes have flown by. But my key messages today were obviously that a food systems approach is definitely worth your time. Second, sustainability is normative, and we need to continue to reflect on the directionality of processes of change. Then pathways with different directionalities can lead to unintended consequences, and this might result in even more trade-offs. But also it's possible to look for synergies across different pathways, which to me emphasizes kind of the use of taking a forward-looking approach as well. And last, because these reports have quite the political reach, but seem very incapable of capturing equity considerations meaningful, there is a growing need for us to address these gaps in assessment more than ever, and to really help bridge the gap between different sciences. And a very quick show of the references before I close, and thank you all. This is what I had to say today, and I hope that this in some way connects to the research that you're doing and has provided some new perspective to food systems research. Thanks.